Sony, why? What were you thinking? I don't know if you can see that. Look at that. Look at that. Look how far that sticks out. But I've got 30 FPS, 60 FPS. Just don't do it. I want to have my billion plus colors. I don't want 16.7 peasant colors. You know what I mean? It's been 1 year since the Sony A7IV came onto the market. And like many Canadians, I signed up for the pre-order, and I like to think I was one of the first ones to actually get this camera in my hands. Over this past year, I've probably gotten to know this camera inside and out. I've used it for a ton of commercial gigs. I've used it for a ton of personal projects, photo, video, pretty much everything you can imagine. And with all that experience, I've got some key takeaways. There's a lot that I really love about this camera, and there's some stuff that I don't love so much. So let's jump into it. This is everything that I love and hate, strong word, I don't know, about the Sony A7IV 1 year later. So after extensive use, testing, whatever you want to call it, in the field, I have to say the thing that I probably love most about this camera is the design. This camera is truly designed to be the perfect hybrid shooter camera. And as someone who does a lot of photo projects and video projects, this is the type of camera that I need desperately in my everyday workflow. Ergonomically speaking, it fits super great in your hand. I've got a little bit larger hands, and I love that they expanded this kind of like grip section that was on the A7 III. The A7 III always felt just a little bit too small, and I always felt like my fingers were just like crammed in there, you know? But the A7 IV expanded that. It feels much more comfortable. That's not really the design that I'm talking about when I'm talking about this camera. What I mean primarily is how they designed the custom buttons, the ability to switch between photo and video modes, and the ability to quickly switch between memory modes. All of those things make it so easy for the hybrid shooter to get everything they need done. I remember when I first saw the design and realized that they had put this quick little switch between photo mode, video mode, and S&Q mode that you just have to flip between in order to switch, and it makes it so easy. And as soon as I saw that there were 3 different memory modes plus manual shooting, all of a sudden all the possibilities just started appearing before my eyes, and I couldn't get more excited about all the things I could do with this. Maybe it's just me, but as a photographer and videographer, I'm someone who wants to jump into the menu as little as possible. Even though the menu is updated and a lot easier to navigate, I just feel like it's cumbersome. There's so many different things you have to sift through in order to get to where you want to go. And the ability just to like switch or swivel these little knobs in order to switch to all these different modes that allow you to do the different things you need to do just make my life so much easier, and on the fly shooting happen at such a faster rate. That leads to the second thing that I really love about this camera, the different memory modes. Unlike the A7 III, which only had 2 different memory modes, the A7 IV expanded that to 3. That paired with a manual option allows for 4 different types of shooting, which for me is probably one of my favorite parts about this camera, and I'll tell you why, and also like how I set it up to just make my workflow super easy and fast. So to demonstrate just how easy it is to switch between all these modes, my fiance is helping me, and we're going to do a little bit of a video and demonstration of how fast we can do this. All right, so to start off with, we are going to start by taking some photos. When we're done taking photos, we're going to flip the switch to the video mode, and it will be in manual, which I have set to 24 frames per second. This is closest to what your eye is going to see, and just looks really natural. We're going to stop that and switch to video mode 1, which will be 30 frames per second, which we can slow down to 80%. Next, we'll quickly flip it to 2, which I have set to 60 frames per second 4K, which we can slow down all the way to 40% speed, which is very cinematic. Then we're going to stop that and flip it to memory mode 3, which finally we have set at 120 frames per second in 1080, and we can slow this down to 20% speed. As soon as I got this camera, all the possibilities just went in front of my eyes, and I instantly set it up to make switching between my different frame rates super easy. I will get into the downside of 60 frames per second, one of the things that I'm not thrilled about, but it's great to have that access. Now the secret weapon of all of this, I've got my video modes all set up in S-Log 3, but if I want something a little bit easier that I don't need to go quite as intensive in color grading, I've got all my memory modes, 1, 2, and 3 in photo mode set up to HLG. So it's a semi-flat picture profile, and I don't need to go quite as intensive with editing, but I've got 30 FPS, 60 FPS, and 120 FPS all in HLG in the photo mode as well. The next thing I love about this is they went to a 33 megapixel sensor. I know when this came out, people weren't entirely sure how they felt about this. A lot of people were saying they wish they would have kept it smaller, but at the end of the day, I really love the larger sensor because it allows me to crop in. It allows me to pull smaller parts of photos out and not lose quality. On the A7 III, when I needed to crop in, it oftentimes wasn't really reliable because there just wasn't enough information in the photograph. With a 33 megapixel sensor, it allows me to do that. And because of that, the larger sensor paired with APS-C mode or Super 35 mode allows me to make way more use out of all my lenses. So for instance, if I'm shooting on the 24mm GM, and you know what, I just want a little bit more of a lens, I want more of a 35 focal length, all I have to do is press a custom button, which I have set to Super 35 APS-C mode. All of a sudden, that 24mm becomes a 36mm at a 1.5 times crop, and now it's like I'm shooting on 35mm. Yes, I realize compression, all that doesn't really transfer over quite as much, but it's still really nice to have that larger sensor, so that the quality is still going to be great once you go into that APS-C mode. I believe it's still at 16 megapixel sensor, which is more than enough for most photographs. The same can also be said for the 4K footage, which downsamples from, I believe, like 7.2K. So when you need to crop in and go to Super 35 mode, or when you're on 60 FPS, you're still able to capture 4K footage, even though it is a smaller cropped sensor size. And then when you're shooting 24, 30, it's just gonna be way more information. That 4K quality footage is just gonna be so clean. Obviously, the next thing we have to talk about is the improved autofocus. Sony is the autofocus king in the camera world. The autofocus on the A7 IV blew my mind. I didn't think there'd be that much of a noticeable difference, but when I updated my A7 III to the A7 IV, and my partner still had her A7 III, when I would switch back to the A7 III, it was painful. The A7 IV is just so much snappier with autofocus tracking and has some additional autofocus modes that are just, I don't even know, like chef's kiss. It just makes your life so much easier as a photographer and videographer. Touch tracking, just super accurate, really great when you're running gun shooting. And I can't even begin to explain how much better this was than the A7 III. Absolutely in love with it. I actually find that some of my older lenses aren't able to keep up, and that's the thing that's hindering me now. Speaking of autofocus, something Sony added in this new model is called tracking spot, and then a size, small, medium, large, whatever. I did not realize how much easier this would make my life. I pretty much have it set to tracking spot small. I've got a little spot in the middle of the screen, and whatever I want my subject to be, I point that little spot at it, push my shutter button halfway, it locks on, and it will follow that subject anywhere, regardless of where it is in the frame. It makes nailing focus so easy, and I use it every single day in my photography. Unfortunately, it doesn't seem to work for the video side of this camera, but as a photographer, this makes your life so much easier, and I am in love with this feature. Obviously, flip out screen, amazing. It makes your life, again, so much easier. Being able to shoot from a low angle, being able to see yourself, turn it all the way around. You know, right now, as I'm filming this, I can see myself because the screen is facing me. I did just test out the A7R5, and the updated screen, definitely better, but I mean, I can't complain. Honestly, I don't think it'll improve your functionality that much with the newer updated screen. And yeah, this is just amazing. Now let's jump into the primary video features that I'm in love with. The first one is something I actually just started implementing recently because I have a little bit of an older computer and it's just not as snappy as those new M2, M1 Max, but that feature is in-body proxies. The amount of time that creating in-body proxies saves me in my editing flow now is hours already. I've only been using it for a couple weeks and already it's a lifesaver. It creates a 720p, I believe, smaller video file that you can proxy onto your actual footage, which makes scrubbing through it in a video editor just so quick. It doesn't seem to slow down the camera at all. Super great feature. Wish I would have definitely used it earlier, but I'm glad I found it now. The next thing I have to say that is amazing, again, for the video features is the addition of the HDMI port on the side of the camera. Before with the A7 III, they had I think a micro HDMI. It just felt very flimsy. It didn't feel solid. It felt like if you put it in the wrong angle a little bit or just a little bit too rough, it would break the input. I know that was an issue with some of the other ports on the old Sonys, and yeah, I feel so much more secure using HDMI port as opposed to the micro. And also it's just easier to find cables that work for it. I always found that it was a pain to find the right cable for the old Sony A7 III. This one's so much better. Cables are more solid, feels more secure. Obviously, if we talk about this camera, we gotta talk about 4K 60. I will jump into my gripes, I guess, about this 4K 60 a little bit later, but it's amazing to have it. Be able to slow down your 4K footage to 40% speed. I use it all the time, and it's just such a game changer. And not only do you get 4K 60 with this camera, but you also get 10-bit video. I didn't really understand the difference between 8-bit and 10-bit, and I still don't claim to be an expert, but from what I understand, 8-bit you're able to capture about 16.7 million different colors, and 10-bit you're able to capture over 1 billion colors. 1 billion variations of colors. Like, that's 16.7 million to 1 billion. That is insane, and it is such a game changer, and I notice it so much when color grading my footage. I wish this camera only had 10-bit footage, which it doesn't, and that's something I hate, and I will get into that soon. Finally, the new menu system, so much easier to navigate than the old one. It makes way more sense. And of course, you gotta talk about the dual memory card holders. I believe the Sony A7IV also had that, if I remember correctly, but it's so nice to be able to have that backed up footage, be able to write on 2 different cards. This camera, you can put CFX Express cards in there. I haven't, just because they're so much more expensive, and honestly, everything I'm able to do with V90 cards, and it just saves me hundreds of dollars. And while there's, I'm sure, a lot more that I could go into excruciating detail about, those are the things I really love about this camera. Now let's jump into things that I don't love so much. I possibly would even say hate a little bit. But yeah, let's jump into that. The bad. Okay, clearly 4K 60. This is the big one. People have been talking about this since this camera was announced. 4K 60 cropped. I didn't think it was going to be that big of a deal to me. It is such a pain in the ass. Not being able to have the same focal length on my 4K 60 footage as I do on my 30 frames per second footage, 120 frames per second footage, 24 frames per second footage. It's like if I want to shoot on a 24mm lens, I don't want all of a sudden that footage to be 36mm lens. I know I talked about how that can be a beneficial thing, but a lot of times with my footage, I just want to have the lens that I have on my camera be what my footage looks like, you know what I mean? So switching between 30 frames per second to 60 frames per second has a 1.5 times crop factor. It's irritating. It's not a game changer. It's not something that would make me say, I don't want to use this camera, but it is really irritating, and it's something you have to suck up, I guess, if you want to use this camera, which is a solid camera still. Speaking of video, another thing I really hate is the 120 FPS footage in 1080 is 8-bit color. It is not 10-bit color, which is like, Sony, why? What were you thinking? Like, when you were planning this, I can understand the 4K 60 crop, whatever. You wanted to separate, your FX3 and your A7S III from this camera. That makes sense from a marketing perspective. But for 1080 footage, why would you make this 8-bit? Like, just don't do it. I want to have my billion plus colors. I don't want 16.7 peasant colors, you know what I mean? But again, like, what can you do? It is what it is. I don't really use 120 frames per second that much. I just really don't need to slow things down to 20%. And most of the time, at the 60 FPS, 40% speed is more than enough. But again, 120's full frame, 60 frames per second is cropped. So the solution to that, you would think, would be to jump to 120 FPS uncropped, but then you sacrifice your 10-bit, which in my mind just kind of makes it a non-starter. The next thing that I really dislike is these little flap covers. Okay, if I'm being honest, it's not even all of them. Like, I don't mind like the headphone jack or the mic jack. I just really dislike the HDMI one. Like, why would you make it go down and straight out and stick out like 3 feet that way? Like, look at, I don't know if you can see that. Look at that. Look at that. Look how far that sticks out. It's terrible. It's terrible for setting up a handheld rig. I feel like I can't have if I'm, setting things up, I can't have a handle on this side, or I don't know. It's a pain. I don't enjoy it. I don't mind the rest. The rest of them just kind of fold out. They're a lot shorter. They could have easily done this with the HDMI port by making it just like, again, fold up like forward instead of down. But they didn't. It's irritating. I'll get over it. The Imaging Edge app, it still kind of sucks. Sony, you'd think for a tech company you could design a better app, but it's, again, I don't really use it that much, but when I do, it'd be nice if it was a little bit more reliable. It is better than the older editions, but again, still needs work. And that, guys, is the list of things that I hate or dislike about this camera. I know that was really short. And quite honestly, that's because this camera is, actually really amazing, even 1 year later. There isn't a lot that I would actually change about it. And even the things I would change, I can kind of get over. You know, as a professional creator, I probably need to invest in a video-centric body. And so a lot of even my video gripes are kind of irrelevant at the end of the day because I need a dedicated video body. And so yeah, I mean, the camera honestly is amazing. That's the bottom line. I love this camera so much. I love this camera so much that I'm filming a little review on this camera on another A7 IV. I have two of them. They're brilliant, they're amazing. It's great for a primary shooter, it's great for a secondary shooter. It's a good, really solid hybrid camera, and honestly, the way it's designed, I would say it's arguably the best hybrid on the market. Now there comes the question, would you recommend buying this camera a year later when there's newer cameras out there? Canon has some great options. I don't think they're designed as well for switching between these modes as easily, but also I'm a little biased towards Sony. I've got a lot of friends who are really big Canon fans, Canon ambassadors, things like that, and they love Canon. They're really big on Canon. Canon's a great brand. I love Sony. Sony's doing great things right now. And honestly, I think it depends on really where your investment is right now. If you already have a bunch of Canon lenses or Nikon lens, actually, you know what? If you have Nikon lenses, still switch to Sony. But if you already have a bunch of like Canon lenses, probably stick with Canon, just because you've got a big investment there. But if you are looking for a new system to get into, if you already shoot Sony, I would absolutely recommend buying this camera. The A7R5 is brilliant. I do think it's a little bit overkill for what most people need. And honestly, even if you're a professional, I don't think you need it over the A7 IV. I think the A7 IV is going to meet your needs more than enough, even a year later. It's going to outperform so many different cameras out on the market, and you're going to be very happy with its abilities. And I think it comes at a really reasonable price point as well, whereas some of the other ones like the A1 or A7R5 are going to be higher price points. And honestly, for the extra money, I would almost rather have, you know, this camera body and then a dedicated video body as well, like the FX3, which is, you know, Netflix approved, and it's just a really solid video-centric camera. So there you have it, my review of the Sony A7 IV. I tried to be as objective as possible, but my final answer is absolutely would I buy this camera again. It's an amazing camera. It's an amazing hybrid camera. And if you're looking to be able to have a camera body that's a decent price that you can create really amazing, stunning videos on, you can also create really, really stunning photographs on, and you're able to switch between them all super quick because you're running gun shooting, this is the camera for you. If you made it this far, thanks for sticking around, and if you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up. It definitely helps me out. My name's Kalen Charles, and if you enjoy gear reviews, photo and video tips, and tips on how to become a professional photographer and videographer, please give this channel a subscribe. I'd love to have you and bring you along on this journey that I'm on myself. Thanks for watching. Let me know in the comments what you think. Would you buy this camera 1 year later? What are some of the things you love and dislike about it? And what are your takeaways? We'll see you next time.